Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we've learned now that Mike Pence will be joining Chris Christie in announcing that he will be running for President of the United States. This week, he's making his announcement. I mean, technically, he's announcing that he's running for the Republican nomination for president, but of course that means he's running for president. He's going to make the announcement in Des Moines, Iowa, and I know. I can hear you all yelling back at the screen right now. He doesn't have a chance. There's no chance. There's no... Okay, I mean, listen, I refuse to be one of those guys who ends up on a highlight reel a year from now who says he doesn't have a chance, and then, you know, cut to him accepting the nomination at the Republican convention, right? You know which videos I'm talking about. You watch them all the time, right? Of all those people who said Donald Trump didn't have a chance to be president. And then fast forward to Wolf Blitzer making the call on CNN. It's cathartic. I love those videos. They're fantastic. I'm not going to tell you who has a chance and who doesn't have a chance. That's not my job. You're the voter. You're going to decide who has a chance. Who am I to tell you that this person doesn't have a chance to be president of the United States? I mean, unless that person's Asa Hutchinson, right? So Mike Pence is going to make his announcement, and I want to make an argument for a minute, not why I think he should be president. That's, again, not my place. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. You're smart enough to figure that out. What I want to do is give you a little bit of a different perspective, a little different analysis on Mike Pence's prospects here. Not necessarily even to get the nomination, but to make a much stronger showing than you probably think he can make. You see, Iowa and the Iowa caucus, it's a very, very different kind of animal. I've been to Iowa for a couple of caucuses. I've been watching for a couple of decades now the results of the Republican caucus for the nomination in Iowa, and there's something very, very interesting that happens almost every time. Let me throw a few names out there for you. Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee, Alan Keyes, Pat Robertson. Remember those names? They all have two things in common. Number one, they got their ticket punched coming out of Iowa. That's the old bromide, the cliche that you hear all the time. Usually it's the top three. Whoever finishes 1, 2, and 3 out of Iowa, they get their ticket punched out of Iowa. They're going to move on. They're going to do more. This year, they'll probably change it to the top 4, right? It's Trump, and then we need 3 more because they just can't have Trump be the only guy, right? So they all got their ticket punched. That's one thing that those gentlemen have in common. What else do they have in common? They ran in Iowa as unabashed, values-based Christian conservatives. I mean, 2 of them were actually reverends, Huckabee and Robertson. Alan Keyes and Rick Santorum were very proud, outspoken Catholics, and they ran on faith issues. They ran not just on abortion, but on bringing back Christian values to the American government. And that works in Iowa. I've seen it. I've seen it many times. So let me remind you a little bit of who Mike Pence is. Here's how he announced his book that came out just last year. Watch.
Well, I hope people of faith are inspired by So Help Me God. Because for me, the most important decision I ever made was to put my faith in Jesus Christ. And that faith has informed my decisions and inspired me in my family, in my work, through all the different chapters of this book and the chapters of my life. And I try and reflect on that. I hope that people can see that through challenging times and through times of great privilege and opportunity, that for me and for my family, it always came back to faith.
He does it very naturally because I believe he believes it. He's got a deep and abiding faith, and it's been a part of his political persona his entire career. Listen, somebody is going to emerge from Iowa filling that lane, that Christian conservative running on Christian principles and restoring Christian values to the American government. Now, they don't necessarily win the nomination, but they get out of Iowa in the top 3 and they make some noise going forward. They become a viable alternative. Now, I don't know if it's going to be Mike Pence, but he's very good at that. And he's very good at articulating the message, and he could fill that lane. There's one other candidate I see in the mix right now who could also fill that lane. This guy.
I'm going on The View on Monday because I think it's time for a conservative with a backbone to look those ladies in the eyes and say, you do not have to be an exception to succeed in America. You can be the rule and succeed in America. You see, I scare the dickens out of the radical left and Joe Biden. The proof of my life destroys their lies. I got to tell you, when I was just a 7-year-old kid, my parents divorced. I moved back in with my grandfather and my grandmother. And my grandfather, who grew up in a very different America, born in 1921 in a segregated part of South Carolina, he knew a very different story. But the first words out of his mouth to me was, son, you can be bitter or you can get better, but you can't be both. That man believed then. My grandfather believed then, with some doubt now, in the goodness of what America would one day be. He taught me that if you have faith in God, faith in yourself, and faith in America, all things are possible. Thank God Almighty for a man who understood the American story.
He's good at that, and it's inspiring, and he does it very well. Both Scott and Pence, I think, have the opportunity to fill that Christian conservative lane. Tim Scott comes across like a firebrand Baptist preacher at a revival. Mike Pence, more like an uptight elder at a Presbyterian church, but still, they speak the language, and I think conservative Christian voters in the Republican Party will respond to it, especially in Iowa, especially at the caucuses, which is a lot different than a primary, where people stand up with their neighbors. Oftentimes, the caucuses actually occur at a church. The last one I went to was at a church, where everyone stood up and they proudly stood on the side of the room with the candidate of their choosing. It's a very community-based event, the Iowa caucus, and Christians make some noise. Now, do Tim Scott or Mike Pence actually have a chance of getting the nomination and eventually being president? Probably not. But who am I to tell you or them that they don't have a chance? Let the voters decide. And when the voters in Iowa have their say, well, they often surprise people like me and other talking heads in this town who don't spend a whole lot of time in Baptist churches in the middle of this country. Well, Tim Scott and Mike Pence, that's what they're going to be doing for the next several months. And don't be surprised if one of them emerges with their ticket punched. Somebody's going to. Someone will emerge from Iowa. I don't like making predictions about elections, but I will predict this. Someone will emerge from Iowa in the top 3 and go on for many states post-Iowa by filling that Christian conservative lane. Right now, it doesn't look like Trump or DeSantis are occupying it. Pence and Scott, they have a real chance. Don't count anyone out. Let the voters decide. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.